I found the divorce papers on a Tuesday. That detail shouldn't matter, but somehow it does. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday in March, the kind of gray London afternoon where the sky can't decide whether to rain or simply hang there looking disappointed. I had come home early from the office because of a headache, the kind that starts behind your eyes and spreads until your whole skull feels like it's being slowly compressed. Vanessa wasn't expecting me. She was never expecting me on Tuesdays because Tuesdays were when she had her charity committee meetings, the ones she'd been attending religiously for the past 3 years. I would later learn that those meetings didn't exist. None of it existed. Not the charity work, not the friendships she claimed to be building, not the woman I thought I had married. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The papers were in her desk drawer. The antique rosewood desk I had bought her for our 5th anniversary, because she'd mentioned once, in passing, that her grandmother had owned one just like it. I remembered how her eyes had filled with tears when she saw it, how she'd wrapped her arms around me and whispered that no one had ever listened to her the way I did. That memory would become a knife later, but in that moment, standing in her study with a splitting headache and a growing sense that something was terribly wrong, I wasn't thinking about anniversaries. I was looking for paracetamol because she kept a bottle in her desk, and instead, I found a folder. The folder was thick, manila, unmarked, the kind of folder you use when you don't want anyone to know what's inside. I should have closed the drawer. I should have found the paracetamol and gone to bed and never looked at what was in that folder. But something made me pick it up. Some instinct that had been whispering at the edges of my consciousness for months, maybe years, finally spoke loud enough to hear. The first page was a divorce petition. My name was on it. Hers was on it. The date was 6 weeks in the future. 6 weeks. She had already chosen the day she would end our marriage, and I was standing in our home, in the house we had shared for 8 years, with absolutely no idea. I sat down heavily in her chair, and I read everything, every page, every document, every carefully organized spreadsheet and legal memo and strategic timeline. It took me 2 hours, and by the end, my headache was gone, because you can't feel physical pain when your entire understanding of your own life is collapsing around you. She wasn't just leaving me, she was dismantling me. She was taking the company my father had built from nothing, the company I had inherited when he died of a heart attack 5 years ago. Harrison Logistics, his life's work and now mine, was being methodically stripped for parts, and I had been too stupid, too trusting, too pathetically in love to see it. But I need to go back further. I need to tell you how I met her, how she became my wife, how the woman I trusted with everything turned out to be nothing but a lie wearing a wedding ring, because the betrayal didn't start with those papers. It started the moment Vanessa Caldwell decided I was useful to her. It started the moment she looked at me and saw not a person but a target. I was 33 when my father died. It was sudden, the way these things always are. One moment he was at his desk reviewing quarterly reports, and the next, he was gone. The doctors said it was quick, that he probably didn't suffer. But I've never believed that. I think he knew, in that last moment. I think he felt his heart giving out and thought of everything he was leaving behind, including a son who wasn't ready to carry his legacy. I wasn't ready. That's the truth of it. I had worked at Harrison Logistics since I was 22, learning the business from the ground up the way my father insisted. I knew the operations, the clients, the routes, the margins. I knew the names of the warehouse workers and the drivers and the dispatchers who kept everything running. But knowing the business and leading it were two different things. And when the board sat me down a week after the funeral and told me I was now the majority shareholder and CEO, I felt like a child wearing his father's suit. Those first months were brutal. I was grieving and overwhelmed and making mistakes that cost us money and relationships. The board was supportive publicly, but I could see the doubt in their eyes during meetings. I could hear the whispered conversations that stopped when I walked into rooms. They were waiting for me to fail. Some of them, I now realize, were counting on it. I met Vanessa at a networking event 6 months after my father's death. I didn't want to be there. I was exhausted from a 14-hour day and a week of difficult negotiations with a shipping partner who was threatening to take their business elsewhere. My assistant had practically pushed me out the door, insisting that I needed to be seen, that the industry was watching to see if the Harrison boy could fill his father's shoes. She was standing by the bar when I walked in. I noticed her immediately, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she was looking at me in a way that made me feel seen. Most people at those events looked through me, assessing my usefulness, calculating what I could do for them. Vanessa looked at me like she was genuinely curious about who I was. We talked for 3 hours that night. She asked about my father, and I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone. How I still expected to hear his voice when I walked into the office. How I kept finding notes he'd written to himself, little reminders about things he'd meant to do, and each one felt like a message from beyond. How I was terrified that I would destroy everything he had spent 40 years building. She listened. She really listened. And when I apologized for monopolizing the conversation, she touched my hand and said that she'd never met anyone so honest about their struggles. Most men in my position, she said, would pretend to have everything under control. She admired that I didn't pretend. I fell in love with her that night. I didn't know it yet, but it was already happening. She had chosen her target, and I had walked right into her crosshairs. We dated for 18 months before I proposed. She never pushed, never hinted, never did any of the things my married friends warned me their wives had done when they were ready for a ring. She just seemed happy to be with me. She came to company events and charmed the clients. She visited my mother, who was declining rapidly with dementia, and sat with her for hours, even when my mother didn't recognize either of us. She made my life easier in 1,000 small ways, anticipating what I needed before I knew I needed it. When I proposed, she cried. Real tears. Or what I believed were real tears. She said she had never imagined someone like me could love someone like her. She came from nothing, she reminded me. Her parents had struggled. She had worked her way through university, taken on debt, clawed her way to a respectable position at a mid-sized accounting firm. And now, here I was, offering her a life she had only ever dreamed of. I told her I didn't care about where she came from. I cared about who she was. I cared about the way she made me feel, which was like I was finally enough. Not the Harrison heir, not the CEO who wasn't quite as good as his father, but just Daniel. Just a man who wanted to build a life with the woman he loved. God, I was such a fool. We were married in a ceremony that I thought was intimate and romantic, but that I now realize was carefully calculated. She wanted a small wedding, she said, because big weddings were vulgar displays of wealth. Just family and close friends, a beautiful venue in the Cotswolds, tasteful decorations, understated elegance. What I didn't understand was that she was establishing a narrative. The humble girl who didn't want a flashy wedding, the woman who loved me for me, not my money. Every choice she made was designed to reinforce that story, and I believed every word of it. The first year of our marriage was the happiest of my life. I know how that sounds now, knowing what I know, but it's true. I came home every night to a woman who seemed genuinely delighted to see me. We cooked dinner together, we talked about our days, we made plans for the future, children we would have, places we would travel, the life we would build together. And through it all, she was studying me. She was learning my weaknesses, my insecurities, the pressure points that would eventually allow her to take everything. The changes started so gradually that I didn't notice them. Looking back, I can identify the exact moment when Vanessa began phase 2 of her plan, but at the time, it just seemed like natural evolution. She started taking an interest in the company. Not in an intrusive way, nothing that would raise red flags. She would ask about my day, and when I mentioned a challenge I was facing, she would ask thoughtful questions. Sometimes she would offer perspectives that were genuinely helpful. She had a background in finance, after all. It made sense that she would understand business. She suggested, about a year into our marriage, that she might be able to help with some of the administrative tasks that were overwhelming me. Not anything major, she said. just organizing files, managing schedules, taking things off my plate so I could focus on the big picture. I was grateful. I was drowning in work, and here was my wife, offering to throw me a lifeline. I gave her access to my calendar, then to my email, then to certain company files, the ones that weren't sensitive, just background information that would help her understand what I was dealing with. She was my wife. Why would I hide anything from her? She met the board members at company functions. She charmed them the same way she had charmed me, asking about their families, remembering details from previous conversations, making each of them feel like the most important person in the room. Gregory Ashton was particularly taken with her. He told me once that I was a lucky man to have found such a remarkable woman. I agreed with all my heart, not knowing that Gregory and my remarkable woman were already meeting privately to discuss how best to remove me from my own company. By our 3rd year of marriage, Vanessa had inserted herself into almost every aspect of Harrison Logistics. She wasn't an official employee, but she attended strategy meetings as my partner. She reviewed financial reports and offered suggestions that the board often adopted. She built relationships with key clients, some of whom started contacting her directly rather than going through proper channels. I should have seen it. I should have recognized the pattern. But I was in love, and love is the most effective blindfold ever invented. The financial irregularities started around our 4th anniversary. Small things at first, discrepancies in accounts that didn't quite add up. I noticed them during a quarterly review and mentioned them to our CFO, who promised to look into it. A week later, he told me it was just accounting errors, nothing to worry about. The books balanced, everything was fine. It wasn't fine. Our CFO was the first person Vanessa had turned, though I wouldn't learn that until much later. She had found his weakness, some gambling debts he was desperate to hide, and she had offered to help him in exchange for small favors, looking the other way when certain transactions didn't make sense, adjusting figures to hide the movement of money, creating a paper trail that led nowhere. By the time I discovered the truth, nearly £3 million had been siphoned from Harrison Logistics into a web of shell companies and offshore accounts. But that was just the financial betrayal. The deeper betrayal, the one that still wakes me up at 3 in the morning, was what she did to my relationships. My friends started pulling away during year 5 of our marriage. Men I had known since university, colleagues I had trusted for years, they all seemed to find reasons to decline my invitations and cancel our standing appointments. I told myself it was natural that people drifted apart as they got older and busier, but it wasn't natural. It was Vanessa. I learned later that she had been quietly poisoning these relationships for years. A comment here, a raised eyebrow there, subtle suggestions that I wasn't the person they thought I was. She told one friend during a dinner party that I had confided in her about feeling burdened by our friendship. She told another that I had made dismissive remarks about his career struggles. She told my cousin, my closest remaining family after my mother's death, that I had been planning to cut him out of any future inheritance because I found him embarrassing. None of it was true. But she delivered these lies with such reluctant sincerity, such apparent discomfort at having to reveal such painful information, that people believed her. They believed her because she seemed so trustworthy. They believed her because why would a loving wife lie about her husband? I was being systematically isolated, and I had no idea. The moment everything changed was that Tuesday in March, standing in her study with the folder in my hands and my world crumbling around me. But the moment I began to fight back was 2 days later, when I sat down with Marcus Webb. Marcus had been my father's attorney for 25 years. He was one of the few people Vanessa had never managed to charm, and I realize now that this was because Marcus had spent decades learning to read people. He had seen something in her from the beginning, something that made him keep his distance. I wish he had told me. I wish he had warned me. But Marcus was old-fashioned about such things. He believed that a man had to learn certain lessons for himself. I showed him the folder. I watched his face as he read through the documents, and I saw something I had never seen before in my father's unflappable attorney. I saw fury. "This is not just a divorce filing," he said when he had finished reading. "This is a coordinated attack on everything your father built. She has been planning this for years, Daniel. Years." He walked me through what she had done. The shell companies had been set up 18 months ago using forged signatures and paperwork that would be nearly impossible to trace back to her without forensic analysis. The board members she had cultivated, Gregory Ashton chief among them, had been promised positions in the new company structure that would emerge after she took control. The divorce timing was designed to maximize her claim on marital assets while minimizing my ability to respond. "She has allies inside the company," Marcus said. "People who are feeding her information about your schedule, your decisions, your vulnerabilities. She knows what you're going to do before you do it." "What do I do?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Hollow. Defeated. "You fight," Marcus said. "But you fight smart. You don't confront her. You don't let her know you've discovered anything. You go home tonight, and you act like a man who has no idea his wife is about to destroy him. And while you're acting, we work." It was the hardest thing I have ever done, walking back into that house and looking at Vanessa's face and pretending that nothing had changed. She asked about my day. I told her about meetings and phone calls, the same mundane details I always shared. She made dinner, some complicated recipe she had found online, and I complimented her cooking and helped with the dishes and kissed her goodnight before we went to sleep. Lying next to her in the dark, listening to her breathe, I felt like I was drowning. This woman had shared my bed for 8 years. I had told her my fears, my dreams, my deepest vulnerabilities. I had trusted her with everything, and all of it had been a weapon. But beneath the drowning, something else was growing. Something cold and clear and purposeful. She thought she knew me. She thought I was the trusting fool who would never see the knife coming. She was about to learn that she had underestimated me. The investigation began quietly. Marcus brought in Colin Bradley, a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud and asset tracing. Colin was a former Metropolitan Police detective who had spent 15 years investigating white-collar crime before going private. He was methodical, patient, and utterly without sentiment. "Your wife is very good," Colin told me after his initial review of what we had found. "Most of her financial maneuvering is technically legal, or at least designed to appear legal. But she's made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. We just need to find them." While Colin worked on the financial trail, I focused on the internal threat. I needed to know who at Harrison Logistics was working against me, and I needed to know without alerting Vanessa that I was aware of the conspiracy. Terry Morrison, my executive assistant, was the first person I trusted with the truth. Terry had worked for my father for 20 years and for me for 10. She was sharp, loyal, and completely immune to bullshit. She was also the only person in the company who had never warmed to Vanessa, though she had been too professional to say so directly. "I never trusted her," Terry said when I told her what I had discovered. "There was always something off. The way she asked questions, the way she remembered every detail, the way she made everyone feel so comfortable. It was too perfect. Nobody is that perfect." I asked Terry to be my eyes and ears inside the company, to watch, to listen, to note who met with Vanessa and when, to track which board members seemed to be coordinating their positions, to identify anyone who might be feeding information to my wife. It was Terry who discovered that Gregory Ashton had been meeting Vanessa every Thursday afternoon at a hotel in Mayfair. Not for the reason you might expect. There was no affair, at least not in the traditional sense. They met to discuss strategy. Terry managed to befriend a cleaning woman at the hotel who reported that the meetings lasted exactly 2 hours, that they always used the same conference room, and that they left behind notes and documents that suggested extensive planning. Colin, meanwhile, was making progress on the money. The shell companies Vanessa had created were registered in various jurisdictions, some legitimate and some decidedly not. But money always leaves a trail, no matter how carefully you try to hide it. Colin found that trail, following it from London to Cyprus to the Caymans to a Swiss bank account that had received exactly £2,700,000 over the previous 18 months. The account was in Vanessa's maiden name, Caldwell, not Harrison. She had never intended to be a Harrison at all. She had only borrowed the name while she emptied it of everything it was worth. But the most devastating discovery came from an unexpected source. Marcus had reached out to some contacts in the legal community, discreetly inquiring about Vanessa's past. What he found was that I was not her first target. 11 years ago, before we met, Vanessa had been engaged to a man named Peter Fitzgerald. Peter was the heir to a property development company, not as large as Harrison Logistics, but substantial. They had been together for 2 years, and by all accounts, Peter had been deeply in love. The engagement ended abruptly, and 6 months later, Peter's company filed for bankruptcy. The cause was officially listed as bad investments and market conditions, but Marcus's contacts suggested that significant assets had disappeared in the months before the collapse. Peter Fitzgerald had died by suicide 3 years later. He was found in his car, parked by the Thames, with a note that apologized to his family for losing everything they had worked for. The note didn't mention Vanessa. It didn't have to. When Marcus told me this, I felt something shift inside me. The cold purpose that had been growing since I found the folder became something harder, something that didn't flinch. She had done this before. She had destroyed a man, taken everything he had, and watched him die. And then she had moved on to her next target. I was not going to be Peter Fitzgerald. I was not going to let her take my company, my father's legacy, and walk away to find another victim. I was going to stop her, but I needed more evidence. What we had was damning, but a skilled lawyer could argue that the shell companies were legitimate business ventures, that the financial irregularities were accounting errors, that the meetings with Gregory Ashton were innocent discussions about company strategy. Vanessa was smart enough to have created plausible deniability for everything. To truly expose her, I needed her to admit what she had done. The idea came to me during a sleepless night, 3 weeks before the date on her divorce petition. I had been replaying our entire relationship in my mind, searching for the signs I had missed, the moments where the mask had slipped. And I remembered something she had said early in our dating when I asked her about her approach to business. Everyone has a price, she had told me. The key is figuring out what currency they value. For some people, it's money. For others, it's power, or recognition, or safety. Find the currency, and you can buy anyone. She had been telling me exactly who she was, and I had been too besotted to hear it. Now I would use her own philosophy against her. I would find her currency, the thing she valued above all else, and I would use it to make her reveal herself. For Vanessa, the currency was control. She needed to believe she was the smartest person in the room, that she was always 3 steps ahead, that her victims never saw her coming until it was too late. That arrogance was her weakness, and I was going to exploit it. I arranged a meeting of the board for the day before Vanessa had scheduled her divorce filing. I told them it was a routine strategic review, but I made sure, through Terry, that Gregory Ashton would hear rumors that I was planning something significant, something that might affect the company's future. Gregory told Vanessa, as I knew he would. And Vanessa, unable to resist the chance to observe what I was planning, made arrangements to attend the meeting. As a supportive spouse, of course, there to assist her husband during an important moment. The morning of the meeting, I woke early and watched her sleep. She looked peaceful, beautiful, exactly like the woman I had married. But I knew now that the face I was looking at was a mask, and behind it was something cold and predatory. I loved you, I thought. I gave you everything, and you never even saw me as human. I dressed and left for the office without waking her. She would arrive later, perfectly styled, perfectly prepared, expecting to watch me walk into a trap of her design. She had no idea that the trap was mine. The boardroom was full when I walked in. All 12 board members were present, along with Marcus Webb and 2 other attorneys I didn't recognize. Vanessa arrived 15 minutes later, looking surprised by the legal presence but masking it quickly with a concerned smile. "Darling," she said, taking her customary seat beside me. "Is everything all right? You didn't mention the lawyers would be here." "There's been a development," I said. "I wanted to address it with everyone at once." Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been concern. But she recovered instantly, reaching out to squeeze my hand in a gesture of wifely support. "Of course," she said. "Whatever you need." I stood and addressed the board. 12 days ago, I said, I discovered evidence that Harrison Logistics has been the target of a sustained campaign of fraud and embezzlement. Over the past 18 months, approximately £3 million has been stolen from this company through a network of shell corporations and falsified transactions. The room erupted in murmurs. I watched Vanessa's face, looking for cracks in her composure. There were none. She was staring at me with wide, shocked eyes, the picture of a concerned wife hearing terrible news for the first time. "That's not all," I continued. "The fraud was facilitated by individuals within this company. Board members who were promised positions and payouts in exchange for their cooperation. Employees who were bribed or blackmailed into looking the other way." Gregory Ashton was sweating now. I could see the moisture on his forehead, the way his hands were gripping the edge of the table. He knew what was coming. "I want to be clear," I said. "I know exactly who is responsible. I have documentation, bank records, communications, and testimony. The police and the Serious Fraud Office have already been notified, and criminal proceedings will be initiated within the week." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. Then I turned to look directly at Vanessa. "I also know that this fraud was orchestrated by my wife." The silence that followed was absolute. Vanessa's expression didn't change, not immediately. For perhaps 3 seconds, she maintained the mask of shocked concern. Then, slowly, something else emerged, something I had never seen before, though I realized now that it had always been there, hiding behind the warmth and the tenderness and the pretense of love. She smiled. A small, cold, private smile, like a chess player acknowledging a worthy opponent. "Well," she said, "I suppose we're doing this now, then?" Gregory Ashton made a strangled sound. "Vanessa, don't—" "Be quiet, Gregory." She didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on me, and for the first time, I saw her clearly. Not the woman I had married, not the loving wife who had spent 8 years building our life together. Just a predator, calculating her next move. "You found the papers," she said. "The divorce filing. I wondered when you'd notice. Though I must say I expected it to happen much closer to the actual date. You've been more observant than I gave you credit for." "Everything," I said. "I found everything. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the forged signatures, the meetings with Gregory and the others. I know about Peter Fitzgerald." For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Surprise, perhaps, or irritation at a detail she hadn't expected to emerge. "Peter was weak," she said. "He didn't have your resources, your connections. When things fell apart, he couldn't cope. That wasn't my fault." "You destroyed him. You took his company, his money, his reputation, and when he had nothing left, he killed himself." "He made choices. I presented opportunities. What he did with those opportunities was up to him." She tilted her head, studying me. "You're different, Daniel, stronger than he was. I knew that from the beginning. It's why I chose you. Harrison Logistics was a bigger prize, but it needed a longer game. I was prepared to invest the time." 8 years, I said. 8 years of marriage, and none of it was real." "Define real." She leaned back in her chair, perfectly at ease. "I lived in your house. I slept in your bed. I supported your career and managed your social life and made you look good at every charity gala and industry event. I did everything a wife is supposed to do. The fact that I also had other objectives doesn't negate the services I provided." "Services?" The word tasted like ash. "You make it sound like a business arrangement." Marriage is a business arrangement, always has been. People just like to dress it up in romantic language because it makes them feel better about the transaction. She glanced around the boardroom at the stunned faces. Oh, don't look so shocked. Half the marriages in this room are based on calculations just as pragmatic as mine. I was simply more honest about it with myself. I had expected many things from this confrontation. I had expected denial or anger, or perhaps a desperate attempt to turn the board against me. I had not expected this calm, almost philosophical confession. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't even defensive. She was explaining herself as though her actions were perfectly reasonable and I was simply too naive to understand. The difference, I said slowly, is that those marriages, whatever their motivations, don't involve theft. They don't involve fraud. They don't involve systematically destroying everything your partner has built. Fair point. She nodded, acknowledging the distinction. But here's the thing, Daniel. You haven't actually stopped me. You've exposed me, yes, congratulations. But exposure isn't the same as victory. I've been preparing for this possibility for years. The assets I've moved are beyond your reach, distributed across jurisdictions that don't cooperate with British authorities. The evidence you have is impressive, but my lawyers are better than yours, and criminal prosecutions for financial crimes take years. By the time any of this makes it to court, I'll be living very comfortably somewhere that doesn't have an extradition treaty with the UK. She stood, straightening her jacket, preparing to leave. I did love you, by the way, in my own way. You were kind and decent, and so desperate to believe that you'd found something real. I found that endearing. But love doesn't pay for the life I want. Your father's company, on the other hand. Sit down. My voice was quiet, but something in it made her pause. She looked at me with a flicker of uncertainty, the first genuine doubt I had seen from her. Sit down, Vanessa. I'm not finished. She sat. I could see her recalculating, trying to figure out what I knew that she didn't. I nodded to Marcus, who handed her a folder. She opened it, and I watched her face as she read. 3 days ago, I said, a court in Switzerland froze your accounts based on evidence of fraud and money laundering. Yesterday, similar orders were issued in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. The shell companies you created have been identified and flagged for investigation in 6 different jurisdictions. Her face had gone pale. That's not possible. The structures I used were very clever, but Colin Bradley is better. He's been investigating white-collar crime for 25 years, and there isn't a shell game he hasn't seen before. You made mistakes, Vanessa. Small ones, but enough. Enough for us to unravel everything. I took a document from Marcus and slid it across the table to her. That's a civil lawsuit. It names you, Gregory Ashton, and 4 other individuals as defendants in a fraud and conspiracy case. We're seeking full recovery of all stolen assets, plus damages. Given the evidence we have, our attorneys are confident of a substantial judgment. You can't recover what you can't find, she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. We've found it, all of it. Every pound you took is going to come back to Harrison Logistics, plus interest, and that's not even the worst part for you. I handed her another document. Her hands were trembling slightly as she took it. That's a criminal referral. The Serious Fraud Office has opened a formal investigation based on evidence we provided. Given the amounts involved and the international nature of the scheme, they're treating this as a priority case. Marcus tells me that similar charges typically result in sentences of 7 to 10 years. Vanessa stared at the document. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed to have nothing to say. I've also been in contact with Peter Fitzgerald's family, I continued, his sister, specifically. She always suspected that Peter's bankruptcy wasn't what it appeared to be. She's been waiting 11 years for someone to listen to her. She's very eager to cooperate with investigators, and she has documentation that Peter kept, records of transfers and conversations that he was too broken to do anything with before he died. I leaned forward, making sure Vanessa met my eyes. You thought you were the smartest person in the room? You thought I was just another Mark, too stupid and trusting to see what you really were? But here's what you never understood about me, Vanessa. My father built this company from nothing. He taught me that everything worth having has to be earned, has to be protected, has to be fought for. You thought inheriting his business made me soft. It made me the opposite, because I know what this company represents. I know the years he spent building it, the sacrifices he made, the legacy he entrusted to me. And I would burn everything I have to ashes before I let someone like you take it from me. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. Her face twisted into something ugly, the mask falling away entirely to reveal the calculation and contempt beneath. "You sanctimonious bastard," she hissed. "You have no idea what I gave up to be your wife. 8 years of pretending to be interested in your boring stories and your pathetic insecurities. 8 years of acting like I cared about your feelings when all I wanted was to take what I was owed and leave." "What you were owed?" I stared at her. "You weren't owed anything. You came into my life with nothing but lies, and you thought you could leave with everything I had. That's not being owed. That's theft. I earned it." Her voice was rising now, the careful control abandoned. "Every dinner party I hosted, every client I charmed, every night I spent listening to you talk about your dead father and your precious legacy. I worked for 8 years to make this happen, and you think you can take it away from me because you found some papers in a drawer? I think the courts will take it away from you, and the fraud investigators, and eventually a judge and jury." I stood, signaling that the meeting was over. "Security will escort you from the building. Your belongings will be packed and sent to whatever address you provide. And Vanessa?" She looked up at me, and for just a moment, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. The fear of a predator who has suddenly realized she's become prey. "Don't contact me again. Don't contact anyone at this company. If you try to hide assets, destroy evidence, or leave the country, we will know. And the consequences will be significantly worse than what you're already facing." The security team arrived, 2 men in suits, professional and implacable, waiting to escort her out. Vanessa rose slowly, her dignity gathering itself around her like armor. "This isn't over," she said. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what I'm capable of. You have no idea how this ends." "I know exactly how this ends," I replied. "It ends with you in prison and me rebuilding what you tried to destroy. It ends with everyone knowing exactly who you are and what you did. It ends with you spending the rest of your life knowing that you underestimated me." She left without another word. The boardroom was silent for a long moment after the door closed behind her. Gregory Ashton was the first to speak, his voice trembling. "Daniel, I need you to understand." "Save it for your lawyer, Gregory. You're suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. Security will escort you out as well." He went without protest, a broken man who had gambled everything on the wrong horse. When they were gone, I sank back into my chair and closed my eyes. It was over. Not completely, not yet. There would be months of legal proceedings and investigations and depositions ahead. But the immediate threat was neutralized. Vanessa's plan had been exposed, her allies removed, her stolen assets frozen. Harrison Logistics would survive. But victory, I discovered, doesn't feel the way I expected. The months that followed were difficult in ways I hadn't anticipated. The criminal case against Vanessa proceeded slowly, as such cases do, but eventually she pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. 7 years with the possibility of early release for good behavior. She was taken to prison on a gray Thursday morning, and I didn't watch. I couldn't bear to see her face again. Gregory Ashton and the other conspirators faced their own consequences. Gregory received a suspended sentence and was banned from serving as a company director for 10 years. 2 other board members were dismissed and faced civil penalties. The CFO who had helped cook the books went to prison for 3 years. The money was recovered, most of it. The forensic accountants were able to trace and reclaim approximately $2,500,000 of the stolen funds. The rest had been spent on legal fees, bribes, and the infrastructure of Vanessa's scheme. A loss, but one the company could absorb. But the personal aftermath was harder to measure. I had won. I had defeated the woman who tried to destroy me. I had protected my father's legacy and exposed a predator who had already destroyed one man and intended to destroy me. By any objective measure, justice had been served. So why did I feel so empty? The answer came to me slowly, over months of sleepless nights and long walks through the city my father had loved. It wasn't enough to win. Winning didn't restore the years I had lost. It didn't heal the wound of discovering that everything I had believed was a lie. It didn't give me back the innocent man who had looked at Vanessa across a crowded room and felt, for the first time since his father's death, that maybe he wasn't alone. That man was gone. Vanessa had killed him, not with a knife or a gun, but with years of patient deception, and no amount of justice could bring him back. I sold my house. I couldn't bear to live there anymore, not in the rooms where we had laughed and talked and built a life that was never real. I moved to a flat in Westminster, smaller and simpler, a place without memories. I went to therapy. That was Marcus's suggestion, and I resisted it at first because I had always believed that strong men didn't need help processing their feelings. But I wasn't strong. I was broken, and pretending otherwise wasn't helping me heal. The therapist, a patient woman named Dr. Reeves, helped me understand that what I had experienced was a form of trauma, not physical violence, but psychological violation. Vanessa had invaded my life, my trust, my understanding of myself. She had rewritten my reality for 8 years, and now I had to learn how to trust my own perceptions again. The hardest part, Dr. Reeves told me once, isn't going to be accepting what she did. It's going to be accepting that you didn't see it, that you loved someone who wasn't real, that everything you felt was genuine. Even though everything she felt was performed, she was right. That was the hardest part. Accepting that I had been fooled so completely, for so long, by someone I had trusted absolutely. But slowly, painfully, I began to heal. I stopped blaming myself for not seeing the truth. Vanessa was a professional manipulator who had spent her entire adult life learning how to exploit people's trust. I wasn't a fool for believing her. I was simply human. I returned to work, but differently. I promoted people who had shown loyalty during the crisis. I rebuilt relationships with clients who had stood by us. I instituted new oversight procedures to prevent the kind of financial manipulation Vanessa had exploited, and I learned, finally, to separate my father's legacy from my own identity. Harrison Logistics was important. It was worth protecting. But it wasn't me. I was more than the company I ran. I was more than the husband I had been. I was a man who had survived betrayal and who was slowly learning how to live again. 2 years after Vanessa went to prison, I received a letter. It was forwarded from the old house, which I had sold, through several intermediaries. The handwriting on the envelope was hers. I almost didn't open it. Some part of me wanted to burn it, unread, to refuse her even that much of my attention. But in the end, curiosity won. The letter was 2 pages long, handwritten, oddly formal. She wrote that she had been thinking about what she had done and that she wanted me to understand something. I wasn't always like this, she wrote. There was a time when I was young, when I believed in love and trust and all the things that you believed in. But life taught me different lessons. It taught me that people with power use it against people without. It taught me that kindness is weakness and vulnerability is invitation. I became what I am because I refused to be a victim. I became a predator because the alternative was prey. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She made that clear. She didn't expect it and didn't feel she deserved it. But she wanted me to know that she hadn't been born evil. She had been made. You were different, she wrote. You had power, but you didn't use it the way most people do. You were genuinely kind. Part of me respected that, even as I was planning to destroy you. In another life, maybe we could have been something real. but that's not the life we got. I read the letter twice. Then I put it in a drawer and didn't look at it again for months. When I finally did, I found that my feelings had changed. I would never forgive Vanessa for what she had done. The damage was too great, the betrayal too profound. But I could perhaps understand her a little better. She was a broken person who had broken me, and both of us were now trying to put the pieces back together. I didn't write back. There was nothing to say. But I kept the letter, because it reminded me that even monsters have histories, even predators have wounds, and understanding isn't the same as forgiveness. It's just the first step toward moving on. Today, 5 years after I found those divorce papers in her desk drawer, I am not the same man I was. I am scarred, cautious, slower to trust, but I am also stronger. I built something from the ruins of my marriage, not just a rebuilt company, but a rebuilt self. Harrison Logistics is thriving. We've expanded into new markets, hired new talent, built new partnerships. The scandal that nearly destroyed us is old news now, a cautionary tale that people tell at industry conferences. I started dating again, eventually. A woman named Caroline, an architect, someone completely unconnected to the world of logistics and finance. We met at a gallery opening, and I was drawn to her because she seemed genuinely uninterested in what I did for a living. She wanted to know what books I read, what music I listened to, what I thought about when I walked through the city at night. We're taking things slowly. She knows about Vanessa, about everything that happened. She understands why I need to move carefully, why trust doesn't come easily anymore. She says she's patient. I hope she means it. Some nights, I still wake up at 3 in the morning thinking about the years I lost. The life I thought I was building with someone who saw me as nothing but a resource to be extracted. The love I gave so freely to a woman who was incapable of receiving it. But the nights are getting better. The memories are getting farther away. Vanessa was released from prison 6 months ago, having served just under 5 years. I don't know where she is now. I don't want to know. She's out of my life, and I intend to keep it that way. But I often think about something my father told me years ago when I was just a young man learning the business. He said that the measure of a man isn't what happens to him, it's how he responds. I was betrayed by the person I trusted most. I was lied to, manipulated, stolen from, and targeted for destruction. And I responded by fighting back, by exposing the truth, by rebuilding what she tried to tear down. That doesn't make me special. It doesn't make me a hero. It just makes me someone who refused to be destroyed, and in the end, that's enough. I look out the window of my office sometimes, at the city my father loved, at the company he built and I preserved, and I think about all the people out there who are being deceived right now, just as I was. Partners who don't know their spouses are stealing from them, business people who don't realize their associates are plotting against them, good people who are trusting the wrong people, because that's what good people do, and I wish I could warn them. I wish I could tell them to watch more carefully, to trust less freely, to protect themselves from the predators who look exactly like lovers. But that's not how it works. You can't learn certain lessons secondhand. You have to live them. What I can do, though, is tell my story. The whole truth, ugly as it is. The love that wasn't real. The betrayal that nearly broke me. The fight that saved everything. Because maybe somewhere out there, someone will hear this and recognize something. A pattern, a warning sign, a flutter of unease that they've been trying to ignore. And maybe, just maybe, they'll look a little closer. Ask a few more questions. Protect themselves before it's too late. That's why I'm sharing this. Not for sympathy, not for revenge, just for truth. My name is Daniel Harrison. My wife married me for my family business, not for me. And when she tried to take everything I had, I took it back. That's not a happy ending, but it's my ending. And I've learned to live with it.